I guess a good way to start is Benny is to start at the beginning. So because this expresses my own personal selfish philosophy, I'll start it out this way and apologize if I don't get it right or I get tongue twisted and say something I didn't intend to. I call it Among the Living. While open a bronc on a warm, still day, the cares of the world seem far, far away, and far overhead like a peaceful sea, I gaze through the sky toward eternity. Then my pony spooked to a sliding halt, and my daydreaming ceased. But it wasn't his fault, for there in his path lay a bleached steer's head. So I laughed, and I told him, that old cow's dead. That old pony thought this was scary to see, and those long empty eyes just stared back at me. But that the sun-bleached skull had the truth to tell, and I shivered a little, but I learned it well. That lifeless skull, with empty eyes staring, was no more dead than I, if I ever quit caring. In my early days as a youngster, I sure never dreamed that poetry would be any a part of my mode of expression. But, well, I rode a horse to one-room country school through the 8th grade, and then I went into a big high school. Well, two of us graduated. In those days, of course, your education was, as far as requirements were concerned, were considered to be complete when you got your 8th grade diploma. So I had to go to high school in a different county even. But anyway, in the year I got out of high school, 39, I cowboyed up on Pinon Mesa with Johnny Jackson and George Jeffries and myself on what's now considered part of the Colorado National Monument. That fall I got back, I landed the contract with the Hiawatha Sportsman's Club in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. It was that was before they built the Mackinac Straits Bridge. The only way you get there is by ferry across the Straits of Mackinac. But I went up there with my father that fall of 39, and they offered me the contract to furnish the saddle horses up there. This 39,000 acre resort, being a private closed club, agreed that they'd furnish everything and I'd get all I make. So I'd furnished their horses for both 40 and 41, and I had won a scholarship to the Chicago Professional School of Art my senior year in high school, but I didn't have any financial resources to pursue education in Chicago at that point in time. So I'd order my horses out of Billings and Miles City, and when they got to Chicago, they'd wire me that my horses were there. And then my old, bless his heart, horse trading buddy, Curly Jarvis, would be in Chicago, and he'd bring my horses to me whenever they arrived. You could put 3 horses in with each carload of cattle, and by the 1st of May I had my string of horses together, and I'd load them on that ferry boat, and it could create a truckload of horses on the automobile ferry crossing the Straits of Mackinac. Created a lot of interest. When I came down in the fall of 41, I went to work for the Michigan Tuberculosis Association and got my first vacation in July of 1942. Well, I had won the all-around at the Macomb County Fair, and old man John Stryker was there, and a lot of people who are familiar with the early pioneering times in rodeo remember old man Stryker, but he and Doubleday were the two early pioneers in photographing rodeo action. And somehow he picked me at that Macomb County Fair Rodeo as one of the most typical cowboys in rodeo. I guess because I didn't rowdy and carouse and so forth. I sure did love those old broncs and bulls and bulldog steers. I got to gallop my horse around the arena and everybody gave me a big round of applause, and I thought, boy, I sure was something. Well, these were the days when the Lightning Sea of Coburn and Gene Autry were making the big rodeos all over the country, and Mr. Stryker wanted to take me with him to join up, and I thought, boy, I'm going to be the new champ on the rodeo scene. But I stopped by home to pick up a few things I needed to take with me, and when I got there, well, by darn, I had a letter from the president. My dad took my picture sitting on top of the corral fence, holding my old horse, reading my letter, greetings from Uncle Sam, telling me that I was to report for induction at Fort Custer on the 1st of August, 1942. Well, that put the end of my plans for becoming a new bronc riding champ on the rodeo scene. And when I got to Fort Custer, some of those guys had been there for months, I guess, and they hadn't found out any use to what to do with them. They were kind of just yard birds. But I was there 4 days, took all their tests. They got me up at 4 o'clock in the morning and told me to go out and sit in the middle of the lot out there on my barracks bags. They're going to put me on a troop train. I thought, by golly, we've lost a battle someplace, because every place we went in the beginning of the war, we were getting annihilated. Couldn't whip our way out of a wet paper sack. I thought, well, we must have had a real fatal fiasco and they need some more cannon fodder. But man, they shipped me out. That troop train wound up in Shepherd Field, Texas, because what they were looking for were guys with high IQs. I didn't even know what an IQ was, but they needed people who could take the pressure and succeed in mastering code and radio mechanics in the technical fields for the Air Force. So I was off into the wild blue yonder, so to speak. I was in Shepherd Field 2 weeks to get my vaccinations and inoculations, and 2 weeks later I was back, of all things, stationed in the Stevens Hotel. And of course I was somewhat familiar with that area because I'd been there the previous winter pursuing my art school scholarship after I'd made some money off my horse enterprises at the Hiawatha Club. Well, Jack Birch, the calf roping devotee, I guess the word. I don't know how to say it just right, but anyway, he was about as stuck on calf roping as I was. We fighted it all through our training there at the Stevens Hotel on radio operation and code and mechanics, that we'd be buddies to the end. When we graduated, we both got our corporal stripes, and as it turned out, Jack was cut to be sent out on shipping orders ahead of me. I thought, well, we'll probably both go somewhere and get our heads blown off and never see each other again, but I wanted to do something for Jack. So one night, this was during the blackout, after bed, Jack, the only place they could have the lights on were in the latrine. So I went down there and propped up on my elbows on that tile floor. I painted the watercolor all night for Jack to take with him when he shipped out ahead of me. And by the time I finished that watercolor, it was almost time for reveille. And somehow a light came on in my consciousness, and just as spontaneous as that, I wrote my first poem, and I called it an artist's prayer, but I still philosophically adhere to this train of thought that I expressed in this poem, The Artist's Prayer. Far beyond that blue horizon, like some beacon in the sky, is a wish for slight achievement. May I never cease to try. Spread the love of simple beauty. Keep my vision clear and high. Not too high to see my comrades that are ever passing by. For if God has granted wishes, may mine be to nobly live. So some joy to all of mankind from my soul may humbly give. Well, in 1984, I had a one-man art show of my paintings at Rockport, Texas. And this was right down there, Bayou or Bay or whatever you call it. You can see right across the open water to the Padre Islands. My host was the president, Cam Leonard was the president of the bank down there at Rockport. Well, he got a hold of Jack Birch, and to digress a little bit, Jack Birch and Harold Emery from Tulsa had started a lot of those Oklahoma Star calf roping horses and Old Baldy for Ronald Mason over in Nowata. And of course, years later when we lived in Bartlesville, Ronald Mason and I got to be real good neighbors. But Mr. Leonard got a hold of Jack and his wife up at Houston. And by now, Jack was a big shot tycoon in the oil and petroleum industry, but they came down and we had dinner together that night in 1948. 84, I said it backwards. And of all things, he was still lugging that watercolor that I'd painted propped up in the latrine of the Stevens Hotel in 1942. I guess if you ride a horse to country school, one-room country school through the 8th grades, kids have a right to be forgiven. My parents had named my brother and I both very short names, so we couldn't be Dickies or Bobbies or Juniors or something like that, Hoyt and Keith. Do you know how kids are? In that time I was in the 3rd or 4th grade, and you couldn't blame them. Those kids called me Big Barn Smell. So here a few years ago, I finally decided that a name like that sure deserved a piece of poetry. So one more time I took pen in hand, and this is the result. When I'm out punching cows and it gets really hot, I know I'm inclined to sweat quite a lot. But just like other folks, I still have to eat, and I surely will grant that I'm no longer neat. While reading their menu to make a decision, I spies on their shelf a brand new television. Well, this commercial comes on and I really goes limp, but the TV announcer is a 10-carat wimp. He starts into talking and he goes on to rave, what the slop on my face, right after I shave. When I finish up eating, I rides plumb back to Lamy, and of course by this time, I smells plenty gamey. But if people forsake me, I'm not stricken with gloom. I'm still punching cows, 'cause I like lots of room. So I'll ignore all your colognes if you heap them together, 'cause my favorite perfume is still horse sweat and leather. In 1939, the year I got out of high school, 17 years old, I got my first initiation into rodeo, and then the fever sure bit me and it stuck. And one of the very first men that I met was at Salt Lake City. Of course, old Leo Kramer was the producer over there. But I met Everett Bowman and Hugh Bennett. And of course, while I was in college, Hugh Bennett's daughter, their husband were classmates of mine. Hugh and I judged some of the college rodeos together. But he was one of the pioneers of, well, originally they started with the old Turtles, and then it turned into what's now today known as the PRCA. But I just heard recently from my old buddy Charlie Beals over Tulsa that they had just removed one of Hugh Bennett's legs because of his critical condition with diabetes, and I hadn't realized that he was a diabetic, but he must be awfully close to 90 years old by now. I know he's a very old man, but gee, after his rodeoing days, he went on to be a distinguished breeder of top quality performance horses and a successful rancher. And for a time, he was president of the American Quarter Horse Association. But I wrote this poem, When Pride Vanishes, and I guess humility's a virtue. In my bronc stomping days, I rode with the best, from contest to contest all over the West. I traveled with legends, Fritz Turan, Dolph Aber, Pete Knight. When we got really tapped off, it was one awesome sight. These buckles I won, I polished with pride, and I often recall some spectacular ride. For time after time, as those bad ones we fanned, our names were most legend all over Cowland. But one sharp old burr sure sticks in my craw. For the ride of my life, no one ever saw. A bronc I was starting really led to this strife. I thought for a spell it might cost me my life. In a boulder-strewn draw, he decides to unwind. And I'm telling you true, he plumb loses his mind. When he blows his cork and heads for the sky, if I described all his antics, you'd just think it a lie. That draw's lined with rocks, both large ones and small, and search as I might, there was no place to fall. When he finally quits, I gives thanks to that charm, or whatever fate saved me, great bodily harm. But that ride wasn't talent, or my extra good gear. The reason I rode him was that thing they call fear. Well, there was a time in my life when I thought I was quite a team roper, and those days back in Arizona when we still tied on hard and fast team rope, put the knot, tied down the steers. I really liked the sport of team roping. But then those California pruneys came over there and put in dally roping, and being an artist and worrying about my fingers, I decided I'd have to abandon that sport, because if I got my adrenaline running, I'd probably run my hand through a dally. And I can show you a lot of three-fingered dally team ropers today. So this poem is sour grapes. Well, the old-timers sure empathize and agree with me, but these latter-day cowboys don't think this is such a big ha-ha, but I get a lot of fun out of laying it on people every chance I get anyway. I've grown old and feeble, and I move pretty slow, but I mustered the nerve for one last rodeo. But when I got there, I was surrounded by goons, eating cotton candy and flying balloons. Then all of a sudden my heart filled with hope. The announcer declared they were going to team rope. Well, they charged at him and both threw a fine noose. But when the flag man rode up, they just turned him loose. Well, curiosity got me, and I wondered what terrible fear could make grown men dally a gentle, weak steer. Well, right there, then, I started to snoop, Not a single rope carried even had a horn loop. Well, then my pride vanished, and also my joys for what I'd been watching. We're in the tube Cowboys. Well, when I was a kid, on Saturdays they'd let me ride the horse up to the little old country store with a can of coal oil. You know how kids are. I'd listen to those guys in their yard, and I was all ears. I made a lot of stuff they told the troops. You know how kids are. Well, we hung on every word. And I guess we got the going to bed early habit from the globes on those old coal oil lamps smoking up. When it got hard to read, we went to the sack. The city people drive up in front of that little old store, and that was the days you pumped the handle back and forth and pumped the gas up in the glass in the top of the pump, and then you ran the gas down your car by gravity. Us kids, you know how we were. We'd peek around the pumps so people in their open turn cars see the funny clothes city people wore and their pale complexions. But finally curiosity got the better of me, and I thought it just deserved poetic expression. So with apologies to my accountant, I called it the Good Old Boys. We went to town, me and old Tater, because I'd never rode on no elevator. And when we zoomed up, I was half scared to death, and 5 minutes later, still catching my breath, I was sure feeling weak, sprawled out on a chair, when my blurry-eyed gazing spied a sign that said stare. Well, we sets out, our escape was improving, but when we got there, those darn stairs was moving. Well, I tells Tater, come stand by my side. Between us, there's nothing that we cannot ride. Well, we steps on her, but the rest is a blur, and things started flying. I'm a-losing my fur. I guess you could say I cut quite a caper. I made the front page of the next day's newspaper. With those headlines spelled out, my fame was much greater. Country road breaks his legs on store escalator. Well, my advice to you, friends, so you won't be the clown, is take off your spurs before you go into town. Well, they say you sure could never go back, and times change, and I think today's cowboys are sure an endangered species. We'll never see it with all of our technological advancements, and some people even believe it's progress. We'll ever see it this way again, but I think that the American cowboy today is one of a vanishing species. And I wrote this poem as a consequence, I guess being a little nostalgic, dust to dust. We're riding this way as ride on we must, and our ponies' deep tracks leave a trail in the dust. But the sure winds of change blow these frail tracks away, and our trail is erased by a dawning new day. Our passing disappears, not a sign will prevail that in days ever gone we once rode this trail. But grieve not our passing, ride this way nevermore, for the world has evolved by those passing before. So shed nary a tear as new trends make their starts, for our most cherished memories shall endure in our hearts. Well, our youngest son, David, lives up at Bozeman, Montana. Of course, when I was a kid, in order to keep my horse, I had a RFD paper route, and boy howdy, I guess going to another county, because my county didn't have a high school. As soon as school's out, I'd be at home, I'd run, or I'd jog, or I'd walk, or I'd hitchhike any way to get there and get on my horse and go make that old paper out. And a lot of winter nights I'd be crying and kicking the side of the stall because, boy, my feet were just about froze off after I'd finished several mile circle peddling the newspapers on that RFD farmhouse to farmhouse country paper route. But my grandfather, whom I revered so much, anything he said was practically gospel to me, and he always said you took care of your horse and got your chores done before you went to the house. So I'd kick aside the barn, but I fed my horse first. Well, a couple of years ago, about 2 weeks before Christmas, our youngest son, David and Bozeman, called me. And his father-in-law up at Great Falls, I guess he owns about half of Montana and motels and stuff. And he builds shopping centers, malls, I guess, all over the world. But anyway, David said, Daddy, with the wind chill here, it's 77 degrees below zero. And I thought, holy cow. And his father-in-law had sent him some carpenters down to help him put up some shelters and run in some windbreaks so his horse's ears wouldn't all freeze off. The way my evil mind works, I run right to the house and got out my old yellow legal pad and took pen in hand. I wrote this poem, Glory, Glory. Us southern type cowboys sure don't have much fun. About all we do is punch cows in the sun. But the real happy cowboys, you can bet your bandana, are away to the north in the state of Montana. With hot, humid summers wherever they ride, there's not many trees, so there's no place to hide. But when wintertime hits, they sure have it nice. A forking out hay, chopping holes in the ice, tailing up cows in 10 feet of snow. Their cheeks sure get rosy when it's 60 below. But I'll forsake all that glamour. I'm a stove-up old duffer. I'll just stay here down south and hang on and suffer. For those 2 summers, the Hiawatha Sportsman Club with a 39,000-acre resort, it was plumb timbered wilderness, and I rode every mile at every trip those horses made. And I guess I'd probably log 20 or 30 miles a day. But it was pretty nice. They fed my horses hay by cutting the fairways on their golf course. They furnished all the tack and bought my grain from the local farmers to feed my horses. And it made a pretty nice situation. But I sure got a lot of experience, and I thought I was sure some heck of a hand anyway. But I think we sometimes need to have a sense of humor. It's a pretty sad situation when we can't have a laugh at our own expense once in a while. So and you can't be serious all the time. So I wrote this poem, A Bronc Stomping Fool. Both toes turned out and no sense of fear. I spurred that old bronc clean up to his ear, and as I stroked back, how my spirit soared, and both my spurs clanked on that old candle board. But right soon after, he altered my fate, 'cause he sure bucked me off when they threw back the gate. And then I got to thinking about the bronc rider's sage wisdom. When eavesdropping dudes, I oft hear it said, when cowboys buck off, they fall on their head. Well, my attempt to explain quite often rankles, but they do it on purpose so they won't sprain their ankles. For when riding rank horses and trying to win, the stirrups no place to stick your head in. When you ease on him and take a deep seat, the stirrup's a place where you stick your 2 feet. So fans not to worry, though you think it a sin, the next time he falls off, he'll just do it again. A heap are still living, and some are long dead, but no one will tell you they don't use their head. Of course, people get pretty opinionated, but as they say, there are 2 sides to every discussion. But I call this poem King of the World. The discussion proceeds on just where one stands. For the rodeo cowboys, or the common cowhands. The opinions continue and the debate never fails till we finally realize they ride different trails. One seeks the glamour and the glory-filled scene. The other stays home where things are serene. Mountains and meadows, streams, trees, and sky. My soul soars higher than eagles can fly. So pursue your great contests of daring do feats. Your exploits are needed by the fans in the seats, and savor those moments of applause-earning bows. I'll just stay home and keep punching cows. You may think it's lonely where my cow ponies trod, but my life's rewarding where it's just me and God. Find those far-flung arenas with their banners unfurled. While you're king of the cowboys, I'm king of the world. They say lightning never strikes twice in the same place, but I get struck with something every once in a while. To glorify it a little bit, I call it an inspiration. But I stuck on those old-time sayings that I was raised on, I guess, too, those trite expressions. I call this one the pot and the kettle. I once met a hand who was stove up and lame, a real friendly Jasper. Can't remember his name, but the stories he told of the things that he'd done left no doubt whatsoever that his life had been fun. Stampeding, trail herds, raging rivers and rains, strings of rank horses, all those lumbago pains, celebrating with comrades at the end of the trail. He never quite said so, but he'd perhaps been in jail. I heard a dude jeer him and belittle his fate. Just a crippled old cowboy, worthless old reprobate. Well, his words really jarred me, and they made my mind buzz. Ridicule of a has-been by a plumb never was. And of course, I guess we're all pretty sensitive about titles and so forth, and they say in the bank, if you work in the bank, they give you a fancy title faster than they'll give you a raise in salary. Anyway, I call this one, call him the Drifter. What's in a name? We've oft heard it said, but with cowboys it depends where he unrolls his bed. Some regions it's Waddy and some Buckaroo. If he's straddling a horse, he'll let either name do. Some places it's Cowpuncher and others Cowhand as he drifts after our cattle all over rangeland. But the name Fiddle-Footed should most aptly prevail, for his favorite music is the song of the trail. Well, we hear so much about the equality of women and female rights, and I don't want anybody to think I'm a male chauvinist, but I think in my grandmother's day, the way she worked as my granddad's partner, hand in hand, that she'd make some of these latter-day professional gals look like a bunch of wimps. But anyway, not to offend anybody, I call this one When Grandmother Rode the Range. In those golden old days, Grandma rode the range too, for cooking and eating, not the kind the cows chew. She'd be in her kitchen before it got light. When she laid her fire, it just had to be right. She made her own lye soap that could clean Levi's too. After 3 of her washings, they were no longer blue. If your hands were real dirty, which she thought a sin, if her soap didn't clean them, it would take off your skin. In winter, her kitchen was the best haven we saw. With feet in her oven, it sure helped them thaw. Her stove had a big rack with soapstones overhead. When sleeping time caught us, we each took one to bed. As I look back, I realize why her food was so good. The main reason wasn't that she cooked it with wood. I'm older and wiser. My heart feels a nice glow, 'cause our plates are heaped full of her warm love, I know. They got all these experts on TV and everything that they're supposed to tell you how to raise kids and all this stuff. And of course, sometimes I think a good swat on the backside shows a kid that you're at least concerned on how he deports himself. But I call this one a rare commodity, and all these animal rights activists maybe will want to get on my case. Call it a rare commodity. You'll note something sort of special, of course, that's shared by a cowhand and his favorite horse. But if you study, you soon will discover he's not what we call the common horse lover. He may just be riding a ewe-neck cayuse, but he'll never deal him unfeeling abuse. If all hell breaks loose while he's astride him, he'll let out a yell and ride him and slide him. But there's nothing mean that you'll see him do. He'll grease a sore back or nail on a shoe. He'll never give Dobbin a kiss on the nose or allow him to slobber all over his clothes. However hidden, it's there for detection. They really do share a sort of affection. Still, what they have may be better by far. It should be spelled out with a capital R. For if you study, in time you'll detect the thing they have here is still called respect. And then I thought in this same vein that probably is appropriate to write a poem that appeals to me called King of the Hill. God made cowboys with two legs, of course, so they could hang down both sides of a horse. Most wise, bashful, not given to talking, but the thing that hurts most is to be observed walking. A really good horse sure builds up his pride, and he'll try most anything if you'll just let him ride. Consider this too, there's one other factor. No romance pursues a sod-busting tractor. He'll stick to horse riding where wages are cheap, but he'll never stoop to day herding sheep. So picture this Jasper, astride if you will, for when riding a horse, he's the king of the hill. And this next one, I know the old ranchers, maybe people in the eastern part of the United States won't empathize with this too much, but the old ranchers will understand it who've had the experiences out here, the dust storms and the extensive droughts, and bad cow markets, and army worms and grasshoppers and the BLM and bureaucrats. But I call this poem No More Horses. As you hook your trailer to your beat-up old truck, you know how it feels to run plumb out of luck. The sun's shining brightly, for you it's a cool dawn. Your secret heart tells you that the home ranch is gone. You've shipped all your cattle, what a cynical joke. With that final check, the ranch is still broke. You recall all the struggle and the back-breaking pain, but year after year, it just wouldn't rain. You tried to be honest and your answers were frank, but those bureaucrats broke you with those guys at the bank. So you go catch old Roney. He's plumb easy to load, and you bounce down the ruts that lead out to the road. At the auction it hits you what it feels like to fail as they number old Roney for his place in the sale. And the auctioneer's chanting, leave you feeling so cold, you steal away quickly before he cries sold. When you get to your pickup, your knees feel real weak. In those tears you've been fighting, find a trail down your cheek. Now throw back your shoulders and thrust out your chin. Just pick up all the pieces and start over again. Years ago, my greatly esteemed buddy Dick Bader up there at Bosky Farms had been fighting cancer for, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7 years. And finally he lost, and his wife widow Carolyn, called me the next day, and she said, Keith, can these old Christmas cards that you've been sending every year meant so much to Dick. Would it be all right with you if we use some of these old poems of yours for his memorial service tomorrow? And for about 3 days I ached all over till I finally wrote this poem yonder and got it off my chest. It's been used for Ken Curtis's funeral and Joel McRae's and a bunch of old ranchers all over this country. Fern Sawyer, bless her heart, passed away a short time ago. I painted Fern's portrait several years ago. We were still on the ranch up at Springer, and she had that beautiful place over at Nogal. And just a short time ago, Fern went over yonder, and she, bless her heart, she was sitting straddled wise of a horse when she went to the last roundup. We were in this crowded church, and the minister was carrying on with his sermon, and all of a sudden here he came with my poem, Yonder. A voice which only she could hear whispered, "Come," close to her ear. She saddled up and rode away to find somewhere a fair day, with meadows green from gentle rain, away from earthly strife and pain. Her favorite horse, her trusted pal, stands empty saddled in the corral. And though we're sad she's gone away, we know we'll meet again someday, on some high ridge where things are fair. We know that she'll be waiting there. At that last roundup, God has planned, we'll meet there in the promised land. On tireless horse, with faultless stride, we'll make that last eternal ride together. Well, we had the poem printed on gold parchment, and they told me just a short time ago that my poem Yonder is going to hang next to my portrait of Fern at the National Cowgirl Hall of Fame. And I'll be danged if my egotistical me, but I'm proud of myself that I accomplished those two things for no other reason in my lifetime. And then they used the poem Yonder at Frank Medder's memorial a few years ago, and I came home and wrote God's Full Circle. Wherever heaven's winds may blow, old cowboys ride those winds, I know. And passing gently on the breeze, they bend the grass, they stir the trees. Or riding close, they do not speak, but I feel their breath caress my cheek, so I may ride no matter where, and know that they are near me there. For cowboy souls were born to drift, so God bestowed his fairest gift. Horseback through all eternity, he rides the winds of heaven's sea. Well, on the 17th of December, Rhonda Cedric Starnes' father passed away. He had colon cancer, and the operation was successful, but they said his whole body lymph system was full of cancer. He went through one treatment, a course of chemotherapy, and the second time through, when they were about half done, they gave up on him. And fortunately, I got to speak to him a few days before he decided to cross the Great Divide, and I'm sure thankful I did. And then they used both of my poems, Yonder and God's Full Circle. And Rhonda took a couple weeks off to cope with the loss of her father from writing her regular article, and I felt sick for a couple days, and then I wrote this other poem, Face to Face, And I sent it up, and when she wrote her next article over the corral fence, it's in that tri-state livestock paper she writes for. She printed my poem face to face. It sure is quiet here today since you cinched up and rode away. I checked your bunk right after dawn, just making sure you'd really gone. There's one big lump here in my throat, but as old Shakespeare sagely wrote, parting may be such sweet sorrow, but we'll meet again some fair tomorrow. As you ride tall across heaven's sky, I will not stoop to say goodbye, for as I ride, I feel you're close. So I'll say via con Dios. When we've both crossed that great divide, we'll meet up on the other side. And when our trails have thus been trod, stand humbly, face to face with God. Into it, I guess, a little bit. Nostalgia, they call it. I wrote this poem, Falling Leaves, and it's one of my favorites. In my lifetime's autumn, I ponder the reason that each year, like each life, and time has its season. Consider those young folks as they have their grand fling, their joy and their pleasure with the coming of spring. Down in the horse corral, all your chest swells with pride. No one is to mention that you made a good ride. The spring roundup's starting, and it won't be in vain. It'll turn out real great if we just get some rain. You start in with gusto and you make a top end. The boss pats your shoulders, your doctor and brand. All sweaty and dusty while your face is the hot sun, you head for the wagon when your day's work is done. The sundown you stretch out and sore muscles abound, but they're easting your Sugans, sleeping close to the ground. You gaze at the heavens, what a star-spangled sight, and off down the canyon, coyotes sing to the night. Then when next you ride out, truly filled with delight, 'cause in just a few hours 'twill be Saturday night. Bow to your corner lady, salute your partners all. Twirl a corner lady and promenade at the hall. You smile at the young bucks and the way that they prance, and you visit with neighbors at the old schoolhouse dance. Then it's back to the wagon, for the work's going well. If our good luck holds up, we'll be done in a spell. Some things happen faster and other times slow. If the sun keeps us shining, we'll be done before snow. The winter stock's scattered and the steers have been sold, so we enjoy our leisure before the weather turns cold. All the grass has turned brown, God has painted the trees. We indulge our free time and we savor our ease. While out at the bunkhouse with our backs to the wall, we can watch that old tree as the leaves start to fall. Each leaf stirs a memory as it floats toward the ground. Tumbling its way earthward, recollections abound. But your watching discloses that the tree's growing bare, like a bunch of your comrades who are no longer there. That last roundup's coming, but we're hoping for luck, and we'll hunt up old buddies like Ken Curtis and Chuck. That night at the wagon, we'll be royally fed, and we'll say the kind words that we never got said. It's no time for sadness. As our trails reach their ends, we're richly rewarded when we rejoin old friends. When my last roundup starts and the head honcho calls, I'll be saddled and ready when that final leaf falls. When I went back up in 1960 to teach, and we reacquainted ourselves shortly after our return with Wayne and Kate Bosworth over at Vermontville, Wayne had one of those RFD fuel deals, you know, diesel fuel and heating fuel and gas and so forth. And Davy Whipple had won the reining at Fort Worth 60 or 61. To be absolutely sure, you'd have to check with AQHA. But Davy Whipple was by Wimpy 2 of old man John Dawson's, by Wimpy 1, and out of an old Dawson mare. And Kate and Wayne had leased a mare named Anemic, who was by Gus Dusty, Leo's full brother. And Anemic's dam was Nave Girl. She was the mother of Joack, and a lot of people are acquainted with him. He was a running, flying machine. Nave Girl was out of Old Leche by old Cowboy P12. But anyway, they had this 2-year-old colt, sired by Davy Whipple. And one night they were sitting there about 9:30, 10 o'clock. Kate said, I'm going to bed. And Wayne said, well, I think I'll sit up and watch the Late Show. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Kate came down and the TV was flipping. Wayne was sitting there on the davenport. He'd passed away watching that Late Show. And she got this old 2-year-old down the bottom of their barn. I guess he just about demolished her. Kate said if it hadn't been for the cow stanchions and the hay hole up into the upstairs of that barn, he'd have sure eaten her for lunch. And she told me, come over and get that scamp. And I went and got old Lonesome. Well, David won his Little Britches World Championship calf open on that old scamp. But he was a rank rooster, all right. And I got my honorary doctors in 1986 from New Mexico State. The next morning I had my heart attack. Christmas Eve of 1986, I got my quadruple bypass. But anyway, 7 months later, and I hadn't been on Lonesome for probably 2 or 3 years. But I went out there one day, and he always ate like he was starving to death. Had the whole crowd full of horses over, but he left his hay and came over there, stuck his old gray head over the fence, let me pat him on the face. And I thought, by golly, I'm going to Eastern New Mexico State Fair and enter the old timers calf roping. So we went over there. And of course, down at the end of the arena where we were, at the calf shoot, you couldn't hear anything the way they had the speakers set up aimed at the grandstand. But about 2 jumps out, and 3 or 4 swings, I chunked it on that old calf. And then I rode down to the other end to catch pen. I wanted to retrieve my rope, and I was riding out. My old Cajun coon-ass buddy Mark Andrews ran up and he said, well, where are you going? I said, gee whiz, I might as well go home. He said, what do you mean go home? He said, you won the whole 9 yards. And I hadn't heard the announcer. I said, well, what was my time? He said, well, you were 3.7. Well, boy, howdy. I tied that old horse to the fence, and emphysema and all, I made a beeline up to that secretary's office and got my check in that beautiful satin-lined maroon jacket, and clear across the back of beautifully embroidered, it says, Championship, Chaves County State Fair Calf Open, 1987. I wear it everywhere, make sure people get a good look at my back. If I hang it on the wall, I sure hang it with that embroidered side sticking out so everybody will notice it. But I've never saddled the old horse since, and at that time I was 66. He was 24. I finally decided that this deserved a poem, so I wrote Old Lonesome. When I first got Old Lonesome, I found out right soon that when I crawled on him, he could search in the moon. But we were both coltish, and I never did mind, so I just didn't fight him when he went to unwind. Yet what time this all stopped, as it quite often ends, and we both decided we would rather be friends. In an unspoken language we both somehow knew There wasn't much cow-wise that we two couldn't do. When it came to tough cow work, he was one real go-getter. What other horses did well, he just could do better. Through the years, I'd quit him till I just had to win. And pardon me, you guessed it, I'd go get him again. The bit he wore proudly is covered with rust, and his all-blackened saddle wears a thick coat of dust. And competing in contests, it's now sure too late. I'm pushing up 70. He's full 28. I've ruined horse affection, but I was lying, of course, for down deep in my heart, I sure love that old horse. If he should go to horse heaven, then my foremost endeavor will be to find my old lonesome. We'll just ride off forever. Well, he's 31 and I'm 72, but I've never put a saddle on him since that glory run day at the Eastern New Mexico State Fair. Well, in New Year's of 44, 45, I believe it was, at the Florida Orange Festival, Oklahoma State University played in the Orange Bowl. And I think at that time they won the Orange Bowl football game, and I won the bull riding championship at the Florida Orange Festival of New Year's 44, 45, when May Germany surrendered. And I think it was on the delaying route. After Germany's surrender, I was home on a brief furlough, and in the middle of the night, all tanked up on coffee, I wrote this poem, the Cowboys Creed. But I sure still take it pretty much to heart, and this is the way I feel about it. Recall the night when the moon was bright as we rode down that sandy trail, how we hummed a song as we jogged along, the thrill of the coyote's wail. I'm just dreaming now, and I'm wondering how the world has been using you, if you've had some fun, if your goals are won, if the things which you sought were true. I hope we meet, old friend, at the rainbow's end as we start on that last long ride. As when life's trails are done, we'll head toward the sun as we ride across the great divide. On that last long ride, we'll go side by side down the trail which will never end, and we'll say once more, as we've said before, the best thing of all is a friend. Well, old big-headed super ego me here a while back came out in the newspaper that the National Library of Poetry was having a poetry contest, and I thought, well, shucks, old country gunsel like me out here in the boondocks, I wouldn't have a snowball's chance, but especially up against those abstract and laid-back poets back east. But I thought, well, shucks, I'll enter the old thing anyway, just for the heck of it. And of all things here, short time afterward, here came this beautiful walnut plaque, and under a plexiglass cover with beautiful brass studs at all four corners was my poem, Salute, as published by the National Library of Poetry. And I'm going to close with that. On trusted horse, I took my rope and searched the human herd with hope. I hunted something extra fine to snare within my swinging twine. And sure enough, together's good. I filled my loops with brotherhood. So now I give her one more swing. To you, the best of everything. And I guess I'll hang it up, as they say, and sign off. This feeling that I think in Spanish is one of the nicest things I've ever heard said. But to all of my dear friends everywhere, vaya con Dios.
The Lowell Area Historical Museum is proud to sponsor community oral history interviews. The Lowell Area Historical Museum educates, enriches, and inspires our community and visitors through the preservation and presentation of Lowell area history. For reservations and more information, contact the Lowell Area Historical Museum at 616-897-7688.